In the heart of Oakland, a man known for giving second chances lost his own. John Beam, legendary junior college coach and beloved figure from Last Chance U, was shot on the very campus where he spent decades transforming young lives. The incident was described by authorities as deliberate and targeted, sending the entire community into shock. The suspect, a 27-year-old man who knew Beam in some capacity, was arrested soon after. As tributes poured in from former players, colleagues, and fans across the nation, the question hung heavily in the air. How does a man who dedicated his life to saving others become the victim of such tragedy? This is a haunting story of John Beam, the mentor, the icon, and the legacy left behind. By the time officers crossed the threshold of the Laney College fieldhouse, the silence spoke louder than any siren. It wasn't the usual quiet of a team finishing drills or a coach finishing notes. It was a kind of stillness that settles only when something irreversible has happened. The type that chills the air long after footsteps fade. The sun hung over Oakland in a muted haze that afternoon, bright, but strangely distant. It illuminated the stadium bleachers, the practice field, the mural of Eagles' pride on the wall. Yet none of it mattered. A nightmare had unfolded, and the light felt intrusive, unwelcome, almost out of place. Inside the field house, where victories have been born and young men have reclaimed their futures, an entirely different scene played out. Hallways that once rang with laughter and locker room banter now held fragments of panic. Voices trembled. Whispers turned into questions. No one wanted to believe what they already knew. Coach John Beam had fallen. It should have been a normal Thursday. Players preparing for weekend matchups, staff planning drills, students buzzing across campus. That routine was shattered the moment a gunshot echoed in the field house. One single crack. Sharp, violent, unmistakable. Witnesses froze. Some ran toward the sound, others away. And at the center of it all, lying on a floor that had carried decades of footsteps, was John Beam. 66 years old, fierce, dedicated, and beloved far beyond Oakland's borders. He was a mentor who believed in redemption above statistics, effort above fame, discipline above ego. For years, he had been the quiet force behind hundreds of young lives. The kind of man whose voice stayed in your head long after the helmets were hung up and the stadium lights shut off. But on this day, even his strength couldn't stand against the bullet that found him. Campus security first sealed the area. Then the police flooded in, their boots striking the concrete in rhythm with dread. Tape cordoned off the field house entrance. Students peered from behind windows. Staff members hugged each other through shock. An entire college seemed to hold its breath. News spread faster than anyone could process it. Phones buzzed. Texts poured in. Former players, coaches, fans. Each message carried disbelief. Coach Beam? Impossible. No way. He was invincible. Tell me this isn't real. But it was real. Authorities soon confirmed that a 27-year-old man, someone who had known Beam in some capacity, had entered the campus with intent. Not random, not accidental, a deliberate act. Within hours of the shooting, the suspect was located, arrested, and a firearm was recovered. Yet even with that clarity, the motive remained clouded, and the wound to the community felt impossibly deep. Because this wasn't just the loss of a coach. This was the loss of a cornerstone. For decades, John Beam had been Oakland's compass, guiding young men who came from fractured homes, dangerous streets, broken systems, and second chances so thin they felt like threads. He didn't just coach football. He coached character. He coached resilience. He coached life. 2 league titles. A decades-long legacy. Countless kids propelled to universities and professional teams. 20 NFL players born from the soil he helped water. And then came the spotlight. Last Chance U, the series that showed the world the raw, hard, gritty truth of junior college football. And in the middle of it all was Beam. Steady, unfiltered, principled, always pushing, always believing. To see him lie on a field house floor, still and wounded, felt like the world had tilted sideways. Students stood outside in tears. Staff members left flowers at the entrance. Athletes who had once feared disappointing him now feared life without him. The campus moved the day as if walking underwater. Slow, heavy, stunned. Oakland mourned the way only a city with real scars can. People gathered in pockets across the campus. whispered prayers, shaking heads, long silences where words couldn't form. The vigil came naturally. Candles lit around the field house, handwritten notes left on the wall, and a sea of jerseys honoring the man who changed more destinies than anyone could count. Officials described the shooting as very targeted, and those words stung deeper than expected, because it meant someone had wanted this. Someone had chosen him, the man who never stopped choosing others. But this chapter isn't about the motive. It isn't about the suspect. It isn't even about the investigation. Not yet. This chapter is about the moment everything changed. The afternoon sun slicing through the windows, the cries that followed the gunshot, the echo of footsteps inside the field house, the heavy silence that swallowed the hallways, and the city that felt smaller, colder, and more fragile within minutes. This is where the story begins. Not the glory of his career, nor the triumphs of his players, but here, in the space where hope cracked, in the field house where loud, green and gold dreams were always born, and where one man's final moment played out in a room that loved him more than he ever realized. This is the echo that will carry through every chapter ahead. Thank you for listening to this first chapter. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told with care and respect, please help us grow this new channel together. Subscribe, like, and share. It truly means everything. Your support is a heartbeat that allows stories like John Beam's to live on. Thank you, sincerely. There are men whose legacies begin long before their names become headlines. Men who don't rise because of spotlights, documentaries, or trophies, but because of an inner fire that refuses to dim. John Beam was one of those men. His story did not begin on television, nor on a college field. It began in the shadows of Oakland's heartbeat, where grit meets hope, and where a boy learns early that life rarely hands out victories, but it always rewards the ones who fight for them. Before the chapters of redemption, before the championships, before the cameras followed him down cracked sidewalks and crowded practice fields, John Beam grew up with a sense of purpose that seemed older than he was. He wasn't born into privilege or comfort. He wasn't handed influence. He earned every bit of it, forged year after year, in a city that shaped him as much as he later shaped it. Oakland wasn't an easy place to rise from. It was a place of contrasts, beauty and hardship, dreams and danger, ambition and loss. But for a young Beam, it was home, and it taught him the language he would speak for the rest of his life. The language of toughness, discipline, and heart. He didn't set out to be a football savior. In fact, his early years were more about survival than strategy. He watched the city shift through decades of change, witnessed how environment could swallow a young man whole, and grew into someone who understood that guidance wasn't a luxury. It was a lifeline. Those early lessons wired him for leadership long before he stepped onto a sideline. When Beam started coaching at Skyline High School in Oakland, he wasn't just teaching plays. He was teaching survival, discipline, focus, fire. He quickly saw what others often ignored. These weren't just athletes. They were young men trying to outrun circumstances that threatened to break them. And the field? It wasn't a game. It was a refuge. What separated Beam from every other coach wasn't the shout, the swagger, or the strategy. It was a belief, a deep, unshakable insistence that every kid had a future bigger than their past. 15-year-olds with no direction, no structure, no support, he told them they mattered. He told them they could win, not just on Friday nights, but in life. And they listened. At Skyline, he became more than a coach. He became an anchor, a shield, a second chance personified. For many of his players, he was the first adult who didn't give up on them, and the last one they ever wanted to disappoint. He built champions, but more importantly, he built men. His coaching style was not soft, not gentle, not sugar-coated. It was demanding, straight-edged, sometimes harsh. But beneath every hard teaching was something unmistakable. Love. The tough kind. The real kind. The kind that said, I'm pushing you because I know what you're capable of. And the results spoke for themselves. Players who once drifted through hallways with no purpose began holding their heads higher. Not because they were winning games, but because they finally believed they could. Beam taught them the truth about commitment, about discipline, about second chances, and how easily those chances could disappear if they didn't protect them. By the time he transitioned into junior college football, he was already a legend in Oakland's corridors. Not the kind with banners and parades, but the kind with whispered stories, reverent nods, and former players who still carried his lessons like armor. Laney College wasn't just a step forward. It was a continuation of a mission. Junior college football wasn't glamorous. It was raw, unforgiving, and often invisible to the world. These weren't privileged athletes with polished resumes and glossy highlight reels. They were the overlooked, the underestimated, the kids with talent but without resources, structure, or safety nets. And Beam saw them the way only someone who grew from the same soil could see them. He recognized the hunger in their eyes, the fear behind their bravado, the potential buried beneath the chaos of their circumstances. To most people, JUCO was football's bottom rung. To Beam, it was a training ground for miracles. When he became head coach in 2012, he brought Skyline's blueprint with him: belief, structure, relentlessness. Laney wasn't just a team. It was a sanctuary where broken stories found new beginnings. Players came to him with bruised transcripts, troubled pasts, fractured homes, and dreams dangling by threads. Beam didn't just coach them, he rebuilt them. And they became champions, not only on the field, but in the world. He turned the invisible visible. He turned the forgotten into fighters. He turned last chances into new chapters. And then came the cameras. In 2020, a documentary crew trailing the grit of junior college football stepped onto the Laney campus and immediately saw what Oakland already knew. John Beam was not a character. He was a force. The world met him as a fierce, sharp-tongued, iron-willed coach on Last Chance U. The man who walked the sideline with folded arms and unwavering eyes. The man whose words could cut through excuses like a blade and rebuild confidence in the same breath. No scripts, no exaggerations, just truth. But the cameras only captured a fraction. Beneath every raised voice and every stern glare was a heart that refused to give up on young men who had every reason to quit on themselves. Viewers saw a coach. Oakland saw a guardian. And as players, they saw the man who changed their lives. But with legacy came burden. With expectations came pressure. And with the city watching, Beam carried a weight heavier than any championship trophy. He hid his exhaustion well, burying long nights and emotional strain beneath his trademark toughness. He fought battles few ever saw, mentoring kids through homelessness, violence, trauma, and the never-ending pull of the streets. Each victory cost energy. Each loss broke another piece of his heart. But he kept going, because someone had to. By the time he reached his later years, Beam wasn't simply guiding athletes. He was guiding generations. Fathers brought their sons to him. Former players returned to thank him. The title coach felt far too small for a man whose impact stretched so far. His roots were deep in Oakland soil, in the hearts of countless young men, and in the corridors of Laney College, where he became more symbol than staff member. And perhaps that is what made the tragedy at the field house so devastating. Because when a man like that falls, it feels as if an entire foundation shifts with him. This chapter is not about the moment he died. It is about the lifetime he lived before it. The years of grit, growth, and guidance. The roots that held up a community. And a legacy that shaped countless lives long before fate turned violent. This is a story of how he became the guardian of Oakland's lost sons. A role he never asked for. A role he never abandoned. A role that made him unforgettable. If this story is touching you, inspiring you, or keeping you on the edge of your seat, please help us grow this channel together. Subscribe, like the video, and share with someone who cares about real stories and real people. Your presence here means more than you know. Thank you for walking this journey with us. There are days in a community's memory that feel strangely ordinary, right up until the moment they aren't. Days that start with familiar routines, predictable schedules, and small, forgettable moments until something ruptures the rhythm and nothing goes back to the way it was. For Laney College, November 13th was one of those days. It began with the steady pulse of campus life. Students drifted across the courtyard with backpacks slung over shoulders, earbuds drowning the world, conversations spilling into the air like soft static. The smell of food trucks lingered near the walkways. A cluster of athletes jogged toward the field house, cleats clacking faintly on concrete. It was a Thursday that looked like countless Thursdays before it, and somewhere in that familiar pattern, Coach John Beam walked to the doors he had opened thousands of times across decades, his posture strong, his stride purposeful, his clipboard tucked under his arm like always. If anyone noticed him that morning, they would have seen nothing unusual, nothing different, nothing foreboding. A few players greeted him. A couple of staff members asked about practice. Someone cracked a joke in passing. Beam gave one of his trademark smirks, the half grin that meant he was amused but wouldn't give you the satisfaction of admitting it. The field house was his domain, and he moved through it with the ease of a man who had spent more years on campus than some of the students had been alive. The day carried the usual weight of mid-season preparation, injuries to evaluate, film to review, game plans to finalize, conversations with players who needed direction, meetings layered on meetings. Football, real football, wasn't built on game day glory. It was built on routines like this. But beneath the familiar hum of campus life, something else approached. Something quiet, deliberate, and irrevocable. A presence moving toward the field house with purpose, not desperation, not confusion. Purpose. No one noticed a shift in the air. Not yet. Around midday, players filed into the field house for check-ins and equipment access. The usual chatter echoed off the walls. Laughter, teasing, the metallic clatter of locker doors, the thud of shoulder pads being adjusted. To them, Beam was just coach, the fixed point in the chaos of their young lives. A few saw him walk down the hallway. They swear now that nothing about him seemed off. He looked like he always did, focused, grounded, carrying decades of authority in his stride. And then the moment came, a sound that didn't belong in any hallway. Sharp, violent, terrifying in its singularity. A gunshot. It sliced through the field house like a lightning strike. Players froze mid-step. Voices stopped mid-sentence. The echo crawled through the air with horrifying clarity. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then the panic began. Some students dropped to the floor instinctively. Others bolted out the nearest exit. A few sprinted toward the sound, adrenaline drowning out fear. But nothing prepared them for what they found. Coach Beam lying on the ground. The clipboard that had been in his hand now skittered across the floor. Blood spreading across the very building where he had built so many futures. Eyes open but distant. Breath shallow. Life slipping away faster than anyone could comprehend. Those first few minutes were chaos wrapped in disbelief. A player screamed for help. Another grabbed his phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. Someone else tried to apply pressure to the wound, whispering frantically, "Stay with us. Coach, stay with us." The attacker had already vanished. The sound of footsteps faded into the campus noise. What remained was a room full of young men who had never imagined they would watch their mentor bleed in front of them. Campus security rushed in. Then the police. Then paramedics. Each movement seemed too slow, too quiet, too surreal, as if reality itself had been knocked off balance. The field house became a crime scene in seconds. Tape went up. Doors were locked. Students were pushed back as officers flooded the building. But for those who loved him, the staff, the players, the community, nothing felt real. Reality doesn't sink in immediately. It hovers above the moment like fog, refusing to land. Some players pace in circles, unable to stop trembling. Some stood frozen, numb. Some cried openly in front of teammates who had never seen them shed a single tear, because the man who had spent decades saving others was now the one who needed saving. When Beam was rushed in the field house, there was a sense, a fragile, desperate sense, that maybe he would fight through this like he had fought through everything else. That maybe he would scold them for making a fuss. That maybe his voice would echo through the field house again. But deep down in the darkest, quietest corners of their hearts, the players felt something shift, something break. The news spread quickly across campus. Whispers turned to texts. Texts turned to calls. Calls turned to panic. Laney College shut down sections of the campus. Students sheltered in buildings. Staff members ran in every direction with fear etched on their faces. Rumors exploded, multiple shooters, mistaken identity, robbery gone wrong. Each one louder and more terrifying than the last. But the truth was simpler and colder. Someone had come to that campus with intention. Someone had sought the coach directly. Someone had ended decades of service with a single pull of a trigger. When confirmation of Beam's death reached the campus later, an eerie stillness swept over Laney College. It wasn't the stillness of shock anymore. It was grief. Heavy, suffocating, communal grief. Not one person who knew him remained untouched. A janitor cried quietly in the hallway. A former player sat in his car for an hour, unable to turn the key. A staff member dropped to their knees outside the field house door. A group of athletes gathered in a circle and held on to each other, as if the world were dissolving around them. The whistle had fallen silent. The foundation had cracked. And nothing, not practice, not game day, not even time, would ever feel the same. For the first time in their lives, the young men of Laney College faced reality without the voice that had guided them, challenged them, and built them. And hovering over the campus like a shadow was a question that would haunt every chapter that followed. Why him? If this story is resonating with you, please help us grow this channel together. Your support, through subscribing, liking, and sharing, helps keep stories like this alive. We appreciate you more than words can express. Thank you for standing with us. Grief moved through Oakland like a heavy fog, settling over every field John Beam had ever coached on. News of his death had already spread far beyond Laney College, echoing across locker rooms, sports bars, alumni groups, and living rooms of people who had never even met him, yet felt like they knew him. On campus, the memorial grew by the hour. Flowers, helmets, playbooks, handwritten notes soaked by the morning dew. But the silence surrounding it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a city wrestling with a wound it has carried for far too long. Laney players gathered around the display, many still in team gear, eyes red, voices low. Some stood still. Others trembled with a complicated mix of anger, shock, and guilt. The kind that says, if I had stayed, if I had walked him to his car, if I had been there. But deep down, they knew none of them could have stopped the violence that waited just beyond the stadium lights. Behind closed doors, local leaders were already bracing for the public fallout. John wasn't just another casualty. He was a bridge between Oakland's past and its future, a man whose hands had steered hundreds away from the streets, now being blamed for taking him. His death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a statement, and everyone knew it. The police remained quiet about the investigation, and silence bred rumors. Gang retaliation, mistaken identity, targeted attack. None of it made sense. None of it brought clarity. The absence of answers only made his legacy feel heavier. And in the middle of that storm, the question people kept asking wasn't what happened, but how could this happen to him? For decades, John Beam had devoted himself to giving young men a chance to rewrite their stories. Now, the city he spent his life uplifting was the one grieving the hardest. His death exposed a truth Oakland already knew too well. Even the brightest lights can be swallowed by the darkness around them. But one thing was certain, his influence wasn't over. If anything, it was only beginning to reveal its deeper meaning. They gathered on the Laney College field at sunset, the same turf where John Beam had spent decades molding boys into leaders, dreamers, and men. The sky blazed gold, as if the city itself was trying to honor the man who had poured a lifetime of light into it. Former players flew in from across the country. Some arrived as NFL athletes. Some came as fathers, teachers, and coaches. Others came simply as men who owed their second chance to John. Each carried a story, but all of those stories led back to the same thing. He never gave up on anyone. One former player stood at the mic, voice cracking. He didn't just save my football career, he said. He saved my life. I'm standing here because he believed in me when nobody else did. Heads nodded all around him because they all understood. John Beam's greatness didn't lie in championships, awards, or Netflix appearances. It lived in the thousands of lives he redirected. Kids who could have been lost in the streets, to the system, to their own fear. His philosophy was simple. Discipline builds character. Opportunity builds hope. Support builds men. Now, as candles flickered along the field, the community understood the true weight of his absence. A protector had fallen. A mentor had been silenced. But the seeds he planted year after year, season after season, would continue to bloom long after his name faded from headlines. And maybe that was his final message. You cannot stop violence with fear. You stop it by changing the lives that would otherwise fall into it. As the vigil came to an end, the stadium lights dimmed, leaving only candle glow shimmering across the turf. In that moment, Oakland wasn't mourning alone. It was promising something. A promise to continue what John started. A promise to protect the next generation. A promise to never let his legacy die. If this story touched you, help keep John Beam's legacy alive. Share his impact, honor his memory, and remind the world that every life he shaped is part of the light he left behind.